if you want to interpret that like materially, economically, there might be an economic argument that we're living in a moment where productivity is very important again.
Right.
I don't know many folks who don't spend some time as a freelancer now. It seems like we're in the gig economy where personal productivity is very important to our everyday lives.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's bleeding a little bit into the activities that we do beyond it. You don't see your running as isolated from the rest of your life. I certainly don't see.
Right, I don't.
You don't see your activity, the sports, the things you do. So even our leisure time sort of penetrated through some of the larger, not necessarily anxieties, but motivations that we have.
Hi friends, Jeffrey Wu here, and welcome to this week's episode of the HVMN podcast. Many of our conversations have centered around actionable interventions for peak physical performance. But something I've been wanting to dive into is the more philosophical side of fitness and performance and how it ties into broader society. How does the growing culture of running reflect larger worldwide trends? How do we as a society and culture play a better role in promoting health? What exactly has been attracting everyday people to compete in marathons and triathlons and really push themselves to their limits? We explore these topics with Sam Robinson, who holds a Ph.D. in history and has really become a centerpiece in the endurance community here in the Bay Area. His writing, published in outlets like Outside Magazine, focuses on the culture, experience, and inner lives of endurance athletes. And he uses sport as a lens that provides unseen perspectives around us. This episode is one of our longer, more philosophical ones, but I promise it's one that you want to stay for the whole ride. As always, please send us a note at podcast@hvmn.com. Without further ado, let's get started. Hey, Sam, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
So you have a kind of an interesting background and fill us in here, where it sounds like you come at performance and physiology from a very philosophical, thoughtful framework, which resonates with me personally as someone who isn't an athlete or isn't a soldier, but comes from an engineering, physics sort of background, applying that lens towards human performance. Curious to hear your perspective and how you think about this space here. Yeah,
so I come from a background in the humanities. I just recently finished up my doctorate at UC Berkeley in the history department, of all places, which is maybe a little bit different from some of the folks that you've chatted with. But I'm from books and words and literature and philosophy and intellectual history and culture. I did my dissertation on materiality in early modern England, which is roughly England between the years 1500 and 1800, from Columbus to the revolutions. But I was really interested in the intersections of culture and science. My dissertation was on how there are all these messy intersections, particularly in the 17th century, in the period of time we would call the early Enlightenment, when people began to think really hard about the human body.
And so the ways like Newton era.
Yeah, a little bit before Newton, but guys who are preceding him. And I was always really interested in the real marginal figures, the real kind of wacky guys, your fellows who are your vegetarians, wondering why they decided to not eat meat, your sort of sectarian thinkers who had some off the wall thinking.
Right.
But that's sort of the background that I come from. And as an undergrad, I double majored in history and philosophy. And so I'm really interested in ideas and why people think about their ideas and what their motivations are for thinking about the thoughts that they have and what could be the historical influences upon them. And that's the perspective that I bring to a lot of the writing that I do outside of academia. I'm really curious about how the culture that we live in and the society that we live in sort of shapes and structures our notions of the world around us. And it's a perspective that I bring to my participation in sport. I like to be kind of introspective about why I make decisions and the activities that I do that I make. So that's sort of general sense of where I'm coming from, in terms of sort of intellectual trajectory and background. I don't know, does that help a little bit?
I'm a big history reader. I think it's something that's underrated, perhaps, in modern discourse, where I think there's a depth to understanding how the discourse is set today, right? Like there's typical structures in
Right.
in dialogue that we just take for granted, and I
Right.
think seeing how these structures came into place, I think is important. Because like, what are the assumptions that's baked into like what does postmodernism mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
what are all these terms that are sort of bandied out in
Right.
common discourse? And I think if you don't have the history for it, you're just not equipped to engage in a thoughtful discussion. You're basically playing with like Legos when people are building structures with steel.
Yeah, and you're way ahead of the curve when you're thinking of it like that, as these sort of conversations that are evolving and changing to reflect the world around us, right? And we are very much sort of thrown into conversations that are already happening.
Yeah.
And knowing like what those narratives are and how they've changed gives you a real leg up in sort of how you can understand the world around you. History is not just like facts on the page.
Right.
History is people debating about the meaning of the world around them by using the resources of the past.
Yeah.
And so like, you see, that's why the conversation is always shifting. People are looking at the same stuff that people have looked at before sometimes, but then trying to say new things with it. And that's always very exciting that there's the same resources that people were looking at 200 years ago can mean different things given the problems that we're facing today.
Right.
And so it's always been something that I found very invigorating and energizing, that there's always new interpretations, new arguments that can be teased from the world behind us, and new things to be discovered as well. Sometimes it is terra incognita. Sometimes it is new knowledge, new stuff that we've found. And that's particularly exciting. But even when it isn't, those resources can help us maybe understand the world around us as it's changing in real time. And so those are sort of the motivations that got me into it, and sort of it's kind of the way that I think when I write stuff about distance running or modern sport, it's kind of the framework that I'm thinking about or that I have in the back of my
I think
head.
the part of me just thinks that if I didn't focus more on the technical side, I think studying philosophy would be a very fun activity. I mean, that's kind of what I do as a hobby, actually. Just like pull up like Russell Bertrand's like history of Western philosophy, just like read through that. I mean, just like I think it's important to just understand like what is Adam Smith capitalism, like what is that actually? Like we all, like again, these are topics that everyone kind of assumes, and no one actually really understands it.
Like the invisible hand is the most misinterpreted slogan in the history of the world. But yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, I'm just actually curious. I mean, I think we could talk about philosophy. I think that
I
could be
get
kind
it.
of broadly fun. I'm actually curious in terms of perhaps for the sake of this conversation, focusing on human performance and sports,
of course,
potentially just expanding out to broader cultural discussion. I mean, I think if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, where was your personal interest in sport? I mean, it sounds like your wife is quite a trainer, someone in the sports world. Right. How did your personal trajectory come and intersect from the history and philosophy angle into sport?
How did I get into so I'm a distance runner, but I've done a lot of different things. I think I got into sport more generally in the way that a lot of middle-class kids in the 90s did. Grew up in the suburbs of a medium-sized town. And, as middle-class parents often did in the 90s, I did like the 4 sports throughout the year, throughout the season, right? So I did the swimming in the summer, and then soccer in the fall, and then basketball in the winter, and then baseball in the spring. And it's like, you're going to do these things so that you're well-rounded and have good character.
Similar background as me. I grew up playing a little bit. I stuck with tennis, but I remember doing like Little League. Like T-ball? I don't think, it was like T-ball. You got some soccer, you got some basketball. Yeah, it was Yeah.
But, as like a 110-pound kid in high school, there was going to eventually be a limit to my progress in some of these sports. I'm not going to be playing basketball, right? So I really enjoyed soccer. I thought for a long time in middle school and high school, as happens, my interests began to narrow a little bit and become a little bit more specialized. And I joined club teams and was playing on some of these sports and got very interested and trying to see how far I could go in these things. But with these team sports, there are real limits to how far you can go given the opportunities that are around you and the quality of your team. There was going to be a point where I was going to need to either get more guidance or search out, a stronger club or something. And I don't think I knew enough to even be able to get there. And I grew up in this kind of ex-urban town near Charlotte, North Carolina. it wasn't like the Bay Area where there's such a strong, cutthroat competition in all the different sports, right?
Was like the military just more of like a route of competition then? Because obviously there's quite a bit of...
There is a lot of military in the South. Yeah. I think what it was my mom grew up as a distance runner. Okay. And so she competed in high school and on cross country and track and field teams, and then competed in college. So there was this sort of like, oh, well, you're always a really good runner. And, I played positions in soccer, like midfield and things like that. And so one spring, because there wasn't, there wasn't soccer, it was a season I wasn't playing soccer or something. I jumped on the track and field team and actually didn't do that well, in the big scheme of things. I was okay as a freshman.
Right.
But it was not like, brilliance, But it wasn't until I think my sophomore year of high school, cross-country coach went, we really need somebody where it was a small school. It's kind of a rural area. Distance running wasn't very big in the South in the 90s. I just sort of jumped into it and did pretty well and was rewarded. And that positive feedback in terms of, finishing in the top of like a county meet and then towards the top of a conference meet and then a sectional meet and a regional meet and then qualifying for the state championships. That kind of positive reinforcement was really important in changing directions and in getting into the sport. And it happened at a time, when you're a teenager, you're looking for your identity. And I began to see that as a path. Mm-hmm. And then the rest is just sort of history. I jumped all in on doing distance running. So cross country in the fall and track and field. And then my junior, senior year started trying to I was like, I'm going to do this in college. Come hell or high water. I was really fascinated so this is a very long-winded way of saying like, how do I go from the history thing to the running stuff, and how as I was doing that, I was really interested in the ways in which the sport was what people in the Middle Ages would have called a habitus, a regime of practice. I was fascinated by training. I was fascinated by learning about the physiological changes that you could induce upon your body. I was fascinated by how the very act of running for miles and miles would physically and psychologically shape myself. I didn't have a vocabulary for that. In fact, the only vocabulary I had for those kind of changes was like Darwinian, just because I'd read in a biology textbook.
Right.
So I remember my AOL, back when AOL Instant Messenger was a thing, but way before Facebook, my AOL handle or AIM handle, Instant Messenger handle was AIM, evolving runner. And because I thought about, I wanted to like evolve into the best.
It's kind of funny. It's more
runner.
Lamarckian, right? Because Because like to be technical, right? Because like Lamarck was like within an individual's lifespan, like you kind of shift your. It's kind of like I think in modern context, epigenetics versus genetics, where Darwin is more of an intergenerational slow evolution, but like you're talking about like altering yourself within one.
I would never have had the ability to have made that distinction between Lamarck and Darwin at 17, but I was intuitively interested in it.
Yeah.
And interested in using myself and my body as the tableau in which that was going to happen. And as happens, right, this is fed into, I think a lot of people who get into the sport for the, into these performance-oriented sports are type A personalities. We're very goal-oriented. There are dangerous bits of that as well. I, had a little bit of body dysmorphia and was, struggling a little bit at a period of time in terms of making sure I was eating well, and became a little bit more fixated on weight. And
so you're trying to gain weight or lose weight?
Lose weight. Okay. Yeah, stay thin. And it never got to
the opposite problem for men usually.
Yeah. Although not uncommon, particularly in distance running, where there
makes sense.
Where there's a real emphasis on leanness and body fat ratios and oxygen output to muscle. So that I don't want to suggest that I've like had a long struggle with eating disorders or anything like that. People do, and it's especially acute among female distance runners, but it affects men as well. And so there was a little bit of that, like at the edges of this, there was always sort of, now I'm more aware of it. And eventually I became cognizant of that. I was like, okay, it's time to eat dinner, right? We need to address this and make sure that this doesn't it's becoming a performance detriment, I think was what I began to realize. And so got over it that way. But so that's sort of the personal thinking that got into it and took me on the path of running in the NCAA in college, and then running post-collegiately and continuing the trajectory that I am now. I think this is my 20th year of running at a competitive level.
What's the distance? What's your jam?
I'm kind of becoming an old KG veteran now, and so marathon, half marathon. I still do some of the shorter stuff. I'm scared to step on the track now to do 5Ks and 10Ks because there's always young kids who are showing up and right out of college, and they've got the fast twitch turnover, and it's those things are harder to hold on to. But I'm a little bit stronger than I was.
What are your typical times to just give a sense of?
So I'm I guess what you would call like a respectable amateur. So I ran a Cal International Marathon last December with a small personal best of 2:28:20, I think.
Which is averaging sub 6 minute miles.
Yeah, I think it's around like 5:40 something.
It's impressive.
Yeah, I was on pace to run around like 2:25, 2:26, and the last 4 miles were a little tough.
Yeah,
I was coming like the night before I flew across the country at a death in the family, and so I was like going, you got to get back for the home team regardless of whether you have a peak race. But so I was coming back and was really really tired that race and felt it in the last little bit. So I was pretty happy regardless. But and in the half marathon, I've run a 1:08:30-ish, 1:08:32, I think. Which is probably a little bit faster relative to the marathon time. But I was right out of college.
You're speedy. I mean, you're a very, very competent runner.
This
is not like amateur. How many miles a week are you running then?
It depends on where in the training cycle. Nowadays, I don't go over 100 miles a week very often. This week, for example, I'm building up again for CIM, for Cal International Marathon, which is about, I think, 14 weeks out this week. And so this week I'm going to be at about between 86 to 88 miles, depending on how far I can go tomorrow. I got a plane flight to catch. And so it's like whether it's a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're definitely moving. And it's been fun because I've been kind of just getting into running where I'm doing maybe.
What kind of events have you been running?
I just did a half marathon like about a month. I did an SF half marathon.
Oh, did you do the first half or the second half? The second half. I've done that. Yeah. It's screaming downhill after the park, right?
Yeah. It's a nice afternoon out or a nice morning out. Did under 2 hours. So I think I had to get under 2 hours. Yeah. But like you could almost lap me there. So
but the time barriers are important, right? Like they count for a lot. So what do you think? Would you you want to keep staying with the sport in terms of developing your abilities in it?
This is where the philosophical side kind of plays into it, where again, my background has always been in tennis. That's what I grew up playing. Hated cross country. Yeah, like it's like one of those things where in high school you could either like you got to play something on the off season, right? Yeah. And then like I was maybe gonna do cross country because it seemed like a reasonable thing to just boost aerobic base. But then I just like waved out of it because you can, if you're like playing tennis at a high enough level, whatever, you could just like do like your independent tennis practice.
I'm training in tennis. Yeah.
So that's what I ended up doing. But I think in recent, like probably the last year or so, as we're engaging in the human HVMN community, working with runners, triathletes, soldiers, it became kind of a primal thing where if I couldn't even like, it seemed like I wasn't like a proper human being if I couldn't like run a few miles. Where I think the typical American or typical modern human doesn't really run at all. And if they do run, it's like I talk to my peers in, just like, everyday like office workers, they might run like a mile on the treadmill before lifting some weights. And that's like the status quo. Right. And when you're talking to soldiers, they're doing like their 10 mile, 13 mile rucks like every day, or
Yeah.
you know, just like as part of like, okay, this is like a baseline level of fitness.
Yeah.
And then you just think about us evolutionarily, like how could we be so weak where we can't even move for like 20 minutes?
Yeah.
So that just got me thinking like
yeah.
why we should have some sort of standard for ourselves in terms of just like baseline aerobic capacity. And that just got me down the route of like, okay, like let's put in 15, 20 miles a week. Let's let's start running some timed events.
It's really important to build up too from, you know, everything that's new. There's always a bit of, it's not a learning curve, it's an adaptation curve, right? And so if you throw way too much onto your like if you were to jump up to 80 miles a week, if I were a betting man, Jeff, I would say you'd probably get hurt.
I'd break my ankles. Yeah.
But it is definitely something that folks can, you know, you can do more. Right?
Yeah.
It's always, and obviously there's the balancing of life and work and things like that. And running a business that you guys are doing that comes into the factor. But one of the reasons I like the sport is because it's so democratic. There's really not that many barriers to jumping into it.
Yeah.
It's a pair of shoes, right? And you know, they're pricey, but you can get into those, and then that's all. That's all. And you can. It's easy to fit into a schedule. It's easy to do regardless of location.
Right.
And yeah, there are like places where you can't go running, right? Because of it, you know, and we get, you know, the Bay is a great place for training. We've gotten a little bit of a preview of what it's like when there are environmental factors with all these wildfires. The air quality's been a little bit bad as of late. Like that's the case in other parts of the world, but we're very blessed generally to live in a country and place where there are opportunities for it. And I think, you know, there's just about, as you said, like we're a very sedentary culture. It's about figuring out ways in which we can encourage that and make it more widespread so that it's, you know, the status quo isn't jogging uncomfortably on a treadmill for a mile before pumping some weight and then heading back, sitting in our cars and then moving to our office where we sit for another 8 hours. We get back in our cars, sit for an hour to go back to, you know, eat our microwave food.
And I think as someone that's not like a professional athlete or was a serious athlete, like that is like considered great.
Right.
Like you're at least going out there a few times a week to do something active. And I think, and I think that's like something that I've realized in terms of culture. That's like not good enough. We should set higher standards of expectations for ourselves. Yeah.
Do you think it's setting higher standards, or do you think it is trying to figure out ways to make those activities easier to do? Or because we're basically just saying like how to make people more healthy. Yeah. You know, like more lives of movement, lives of physical worth.
Yeah.
Is it about creating standards, or is it about, because I kind of think of it as about, you know, lowering the barriers of entry. That's sort of the perspective that I see, like making it easier to where,
but I think the argument you're saying, like it's friggin' easy to just go outside and like run around the block 7 times.
Yeah.
Like I think that's like one of the things I think running is so pure. It is so primal.
Right.
Like, you don't need like $100 tennis racket. Like I was relatively blessed where my parents could afford to put me to, you know, tennis, you know, get me on a court. Like running, it's like, I mean, some of the best runners are in, you know, East Africa. They're just out there running.
Correct. Yeah. And so I think maybe some of it is becoming a bit evangelical about the sport itself, about the activity.
Yeah.
And not just pitching it to folks like you and I, but think like this is something that
I'm actually curious from a historical perspective. Maybe you can add some color here. Maybe I've read more about this, but it seems to me that within the last 20, 30 years with this sort of everybody's a winner culture, PC culture, you can't say, hey, you're slow, Bobby or Jane, like you need to run faster. Or like you gotta, like you might be a little bit overweight and that's not healthy for you. Like just run. And like if you don't run a certain amount, like maybe you don't get like an A in physical education. Is that like, I sense that from a cultural perspective and just how we engage with people. I think there's, I think the beauty of America is that there's like multicultural, just, you know, there's a relative, like there's multiple paths of life. And I think that's like the beauty of America. But I'm just wondering, has it started to backfire in a sense where there's no longer some sense of direction? Like to me, there is some truth that as a nation state, if we want to encourage a more healthful society, there is just some direction that we should be encouraging more than other directions. Yeah. I think a lot of it though, would be about, I don't know if it is, if it's the participation culture, participation award culture problem, as it is
trying to create opportunities for these activities that are actually more inclusive as opposed to less inclusive. And I think, and I say that as I come from a place of real privilege, particularly growing up in the South, where you could see where as we mentioned, right? Like we both come from that, the every sport a season family, right? Where that was very much a find your passions, right? And I don't think that a lot of people, a lot of Americans, to say specifically, get those opportunities. And so figuring out ways to make those interests evident to others, to show like here are the places in which you can do it. And a good example of that's happening in real time now across the Bay is Running for a Better Oakland, which is this nonprofit that's oriented by the runners of Oakland. I mean, there are running clubs that are literally volunteering to do this, to sort of show students from underprivileged backgrounds, like, this is how easy this is.
Right.
Here are the resources that can do it. Here are the spaces, these public spaces that belong to you,
right,
where you can do this.
Right.
And that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And I think it will display to a wider section of people, wider demographic of people, some of the real not just advantages, but real benefits that these activities can do. And so I'm hopeful about that. And so figuring out ways to not just create more of these organizations, because there's always another nonprofit, but figuring out ways to really enable their work and to maybe expand upon it. And whether that means, I think it's a combination of social conversations like we're having now, or political changes that sort of, part of the reason it works is because Lake Merritt is a lot nicer of a place to run around than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's safe, it's cleaner, it's nicer.
Yeah.
And so that took real effort on the part of the city government. And so stuff like a collaboration of public and private interests, I think. And so, there's probably a notion of, where we need to maybe stirring up what it is that it means to be fit, and think a little bit about this. But I also think that it's about these real engagements in the community around us that will show the benefits of these activities.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point. I think those are the types of initiatives that we should be encouraging, where the role models, or just that you can't necessarily just look up to LeBron James, his life is just unrealistic. But if there's local on the ground community members that are just saying, hey, it's not that hard to run 3 miles.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to run around the park. And this is kind of what we do for stretching. And I think my personal journey through running was that I just didn't know how you could not, it was just painful to run for an hour.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember the first few times, I think in a current culture where you're just addicted to your phone, you're I want to I feel like I need to just get some information.
I'm missing something. Yeah.
Right. And I remember asking Michael Brandt, who's a serious runner, or getting more and more serious into running. What do you think about all the time?
Right.
And I think that's what people would ask me, when you're running a half marathon, what are you thinking about? You're out on the road for an hour and a half, 2 hours. What do you think about? And it's now it's very meditative, reflective. It's nice. I kind of miss that kind of that mental state of being.
Yeah.
But I think people, when they don't run enough, are just getting into that hump where that's even comfortable. They don't. They say, oh, it's hard. I find it too hard to not do anything digital for 20 minutes and give up.
Right.
So I think it's people on the ground telling them no, I was there. I'm you literally 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I just did it a few times and powered through and punched through.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talk about sort of the meditativeness of running. I had a professor I was taking a seminar with who found out that I was, pretty competitive runner.
Yeah.
And he asked, well, how many miles do you run? I told him. He was like, oh my gosh. So, well, you must think about a lot when you're running. And I remember actually, I don't think about much at all. Or if I do think, it's a almost very flowing form of thought.
It's transient.
Right? Yeah, it's not intensive.
Right.
But I think, when I think now, we are so, we're always we're engaging with some sort of content throughout our lives. We're cyborgs, always sort of, stuck on our screens and thinking about stuff that's sort of flitting through our eyeballs. When I'm running, it's a one moment where usually I'm a little unplugged,
Yeah.
and you can let your mind take the direction
You're
it
not
wants to
listening
go.
to music, right? Like
Sometimes I will when
Okay.
I'm really tired. I'll
Okay.
use it like on my Mondays is sometimes my music day or podcast day,
Okay.
where just getting out the door, like if
Yeah.
I've done a long run the day
Yeah.
before and I'll be a little bit tired, just
Yeah.
listening to some music can be helpful. So I'm not technology agnostic. Well, I guess I'm technology
phobic?
agnostic. I'm not technology phobic. Yeah.
I tore out all the
You do
earbuds.
all of it, nothing.
Because it got distracting to me. I
Yeah.
enjoyed like being in my own head.
I put the do not disturb on.
Okay.
I don't want the outside world getting in me,
But
except
even like
for
lyrics,
the voice.
like I don't want to like
Yeah.
I don't know. You're listening to some pop song, and you're like they're talking about love, or
Yeah.
listening to like Hamilton, talking about like making America. You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"No,
yeah.
I'm trying to
Too
run.
much. I'm trying to run.
Yeah, I'm trying to just run.
I get that. I guess there's sometimes where I'm so tired that I need a little bit of a distraction
Yeah.
when I'm doing it. And I think it's especially like in a heavy training cycle when it's like, oh, I gotta go out for another 10 miles.
Yeah.
Like, like anything, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And at a certain point, when you're doing this heavy training, there are going to be days you don't want to do it. And
Yeah.
it's not meditative. It's
Right.
my stomach hurts, my legs
Yeah.
hurt. So I think, how to get people to that. I mean, you're right. Cause I started in the sport so early that I don't really remember. And it was very active,
Right.
like when you're playing soccer, you're running, I don't know how many miles
Right.
in a game or a practice. So the transition from that to running wasn't very much. And then just as I was growing up, I was doing more and more and kind of, acclimating to the effort. But after college, I had a lot of injuries though in college, and eventually reached the point my senior year where I was like struggling to get out of bed and put my pants on. I was always so hurt. And I walked away from it and got into cycling and was racing my bike for 7 or 8 months or so, not that long. But then when I came back from that, I remember I was doing a ride and I like crashed in a previous race and was really worried. I was like, eventually my number is going to come up. I'm going to break my femur. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't really have health insurance. So I like biked back in the middle of this training where I was like, I think I'm done, and took off my bib and put on some running shorts with my bad cycling tan lines.
Yeah.
And I went out to go run my like staple 3-mile loop that I did in my hometown.
Yeah.
And it was awful. Like my stomach hurt and like my head hurt. I never had my head hurt from running before, but it finally gave me a sense of insight. Like, this is why people complain about running. This is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It took a couple of weeks to get back into the groove.
Fully adapted again.
Yeah. So I empathize, and so but there eventually though, if you have
I think
any,
it's like telling stories. Like
yeah,
it sucks for everyone. Like I think you talk to Michael, you talk to some of the elite runners, and they're like, it still sucks every time they're out there. Like
right.
It's still cold if you're like running at 6 a.m. before
It is
work.
still dark and cold and awful. I was out this morning before the sun rose, I guess in the smoke fog that we had this morning. And I saw, it was weird. I was out running on these trails. The light was just beginning to pick up. And I saw this coyote that had killed an animal, was dragging this animal out into the woods in the Oakland Hills. And he was running down the trail. He was just far enough away. Couldn't see what he was eating, but I thought, I feel like that dead animal right now. It's so early. I empathize with it. So, but it gets better. I mean, not every day is like that. And when you're
what motivates you? I mean, I think to give you I think what motivated me was just like seeing my colleagues,
right?
Like they're like like Michael wasn't a professional athlete, but like now he's like doing like pretty reasonable times,
right? Yeah,
and I just saw like. He's not a magic being, but he just worked hard, had discipline. And then you talk to like, some of our, our customers who are athletes or military. And again, like you talk to them, they're like a real human being. Like you look at like you're like, wow, like you clearly have done a lot more than me, but I understand that you're not a different alien to me.
Right.
Like, I feel like I put in some time, I could come within your range.
Right.
And I think just seeing and being exposed to people from a very high level, it made it like real to me that yes.
Yeah.
I can at least get within the realm of being in the same universe as you.
Yeah. I think of those folks as accessible heroes.
Yeah.
They're there. You can empathize with them. You can relate to their lives. You see that they're similar to yours, and you can aspire, and they're inspiring that you can do that. Yeah. I think that explains a lot of why in some of these more niche sports, there are people who are very popular on social media who aren't necessarily the fastest folks out there. They're just the ones whom you can empathize with and relate to and sympathize with when they have difficulties. But what motivates me? my motivations have changed a lot over the years. I was very self-focused for a long time. Personal improvement, personal best, getting, trying to become all conference, trying to become all region, trying to qualify for meets, trying to get faster.
Right.
Now, as personal bests are fewer and farther between. There are longer stretches of time between them. Still happening, but not with the consistency that they had when I was 18.
Right.
Now, motivations have to change, and sometimes it's trying out a new event, a new distance, trying to get to accomplish, conquer that like a 50K or an ultra marathon or something like that. But also, for me right now in particular, I'm very community focused. I'm training with a group of folks in the East Bay. We're known with the sort of the kind of a, what would I call it? Quirky name, the That's Fine Track Club, because if anything goes south, it's like, well, that's fine, that's okay. So they're sort of cavalier and ironic about their approach to things. But however, we've got a really good training group going with a bunch of guys, some post-collegiate, some guys who didn't run in college, some ladies who ran in college, some ladies who didn't.
Right.
And we're doing a lot of work together. And I see my role more and more as one of being maybe sort of the moral and motivational center for a number of people as opposed to just myself.
And
it's a big motivation when you're
responsibility to
it's responsibility when you need to be somewhere at 6 a.m. for a workout and people are depending on you to be there or at least expecting you to be there.
Right.
It's a strong motivation to get up even when you're tired. And so now, it's not so much personal goals that are really getting me going and getting through some of these hard workouts. It's trying to be part of the rising tide that lifts all the boats and to just be a part of that. And so, so even when I don't perform as well as I want to, it's nice. It's just really rewarding to see some of my friends who I've been training with, doing these workouts with, when they succeed, that also, you feel it and reflects on you as well. We did a 5K on the 4th of July, and I had a terrible race. It was not good. Just, hip was bothering me a little bit, and I was a little overtrained. I was ready for a break. Had been doing some races over the summer. But one of my friends he won the thing, and he won it, his first time ever winning a race. That's so exciting.
So you're just
first time he'd ever broken the tape, right? And you'd be training with this guy for a year, and you just know he's never gotten the win. And John won, and it's really vitalizing, right? He's like, okay. Like, that's great. We all gain from that. And so that sense of trying to build that community, trying to work off this group dynamic is, I think, there's a performance boost to that.
Yeah.
When people are depending on you.
Yeah.
I
was going to say that. I think that makes sense in terms of, I think we both very much agree that accessible heroes, I think, is a good term. And like that local support, that group dynamic is really helpful. Yeah. I'm just wondering if we just extend this out to more of a political or structural changes. I mean, would it be too extreme to say, look, healthcare is a sixth of the American economy, outcomes are getting worse, costs going up. Right. What if you did something like, if you can run, like 8 miles for 5 miles, which is, something that like, Ranger battalions are sort of positioned to be. And you can hit that, you maybe get a tax break or some sort of incentive. Yeah. Will that be overly handed from a government perspective? Like, I think that's something that I've just been pondering recently. Yeah. Because I think if you just look at the current style of medicine, it's very much treat symptoms. Correct. Like, you are broken. All right, here are some pharmaceuticals. Right. I think a lot of people realize that and are trying to make it a lot more lifestyle driven, pre-intervention type of a lifestyle change in the culture. Right. Is it the place of government to even push that further along? I think we can agree. I think most people would agree that the community, the individual, the grassroots movement seems very reasonable. People should be more and more doing that and attract people towards your cause. Yeah. What do you think from a historical or just like a political perspective?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions, and they are the big questions
Yeah.
right now. As where our healthcare system is a mess. It's actually a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's not a tragedy, it's a travesty.
Yeah.
Tragedy implies something that's out of your control.
Yeah.
Whereas healthcare is a political mess of somewhat of our own making.
Yeah.
I don't know. One worry that I would have about being overly technocratic in terms of incentivizing, saying, like, if you can run a mile at a certain, I've thought this way. I've had this idea before.
Yeah.
If you can incentivize folks to be healthy, you might end up rewarding the very folks who are already healthy to begin with, giving a tax break to the folks who at the moment are, who can run, an 8-minute mile or 9-minute mile, which tend to be, to use the parlance of our time.
You're bifurcating
exactly. You're widening the gap anyway.
Yeah.
You're making the quote unquote coastal elites are just going to, of course, folks like me who live in Oakland with a degree who know and have had all these opportunities. They'll get their tax benefit and they'll take their $200 and they'll buy some running shoes with it and do more of it.
Yeah.
So my fear would be that you would just, widen the gap. So I think the problem would be, my father's a family physician.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he talks a lot about is that in the last 20 to 30 years, the thing that has declined has been the stuff that the market hasn't incentivized, which is not just responding to trauma or illness, as you mentioned, right? Like treating the symptoms of the larger problem, which is why all these chronic diseases, the problems that we've come out of, diabetes, obesity,
neurological conditions,
exactly, pain, right? These are problems of sort of the late capitalist society that we live in, and so how do you go about doing that? One of the issues has been the decline of day-to-day primary care. Mm-hmm. We don't have the country doctor anymore, who knows who you are, who knows your name, who knows your habits, who can give you the kind of guidance with which you're used to. So one thing might be investing in that day-to-day coverage and care that we've begun to retreat from as we've been thinking about outcomes as opposed to lifestyles.
Yep.
And I'm no policy expert, on this front. It's just, so I don't know. I don't want to riff too much anecdotally, but it does seem like I don't know who my doctor is. I have like some fellow at Kaiser.
Yeah.
Actually, his name might be Jeffrey. I talked to him once on the phone. I didn't even see him in person. I talked to him on the phone because I was having like a sinus infection. He prescribed some antibiotics.
Great. Yeah.
Great. Right. But that guy doesn't know me. And so it might be that one of the ways to think about it would be how do you take that energy at the grassroots and stay at the grassroots, which is the point of contact, which is the point of human contact. How do you make the national local and the local national? Because that's where the people still believe in politics on the local level. People still, very few people dislike their mayor. It's interesting. We're such a polarized. Well, maybe but in San Francisco and Oakland it can be a little bit, but and most of America, right? Yeah. There's not a lot of animus towards your city council or your board of education,
right?
It's because these are people you get groceries with, right? They're people you see them on the face to face, and they're dealing with the problems of everyday life.
Right.
So my sense is that we probably maybe need to prove that government is not a swear word,
right?
And starting small and working up from there,
right,
is probably going to be the path forward in this particular environment where things are so hyper partisan, where any sort of a suggestion of government interference in the market is seen as a nanny state or socialism.
Right.
I think those are the trajectories we want to move towards, but I think the process has to be one of proving to folks that this kind of these lifestyles, this form of engagement that we see happening in other sectors of our lives can be ported over to the problems of larger political import.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm kind of riffing a little bit.
Yeah,
so.
I don't think this is going to be solvable in a single conversation. I think, to my extreme, right? If you extrapolate where I'm going with you have some government given incentives, then does that look like an authoritarian state, right? It's like, where is that balance? Where, again, I think, almost every single country is like kind of an experiment, and I think the American experiment is beautiful in the sense that there is, I think, this binding notion of freedom of exploration and then capitalism and markets, that I think allowed us to have all this innovation, but having some sense of community and social safety net,
Yeah.
to make sure that people don't overly fall to the wayside. I think, and I think that all the politics comes from like, where is exactly that line?
Yeah. I don't think the issue is creating a safety net, but creating like re-enmeshing people to the communities in which they live. I think there's a real sense of in which the institutions that used to bind us together have eroded to a great extent. Which is why I've noticed people are just so hungry to do things together. Right? Like
to join like communities, like
to join communities,
or like listen to the conversation like ours.
Exactly. Listen to conversation like ours. They're hungry for that. You know, like the November Project, you know, the fitness group that meets in San Francisco.
Okay.
It's free. And there's one in Oakland as well. It's this group of people, they meet at 6 a.m. in the morning before work, I think on Tuesday or Wednesdays. Yeah. It is huge. It is this, they call them tribes of people who get together and just sort of work out together, do kind of like, not necessarily functional fitness, but run a little bit, do some stairs, do some push-ups and stuff.
Right.
And it's people just want to be together. It almost functions in the ways in which you know, the church used to, right? Where it was not just belief and metaphysical understanding of the world, but people being together, right? And thinking about the world around them together. And I just feel it. I feel like folks are thirsty for that.
Yes.
And so it's just, I don't think I have the solutions to that. I can identify the problem that we need to think about. How are these ways in which we can reconnect folks together? And I think some of it are activities like we've been talking about. Yeah. And I think, and I think some of it is figuring out ways to move those into other institutions, whether it's just like book clubs or town halls and community meetings and things like that, where we stop seeing each other as, you know, partisan opponents and more as connected to one another in the world in which we're living. And so that sounds a little new agey, but in the real term, like, you know, in the real world of like connections of people on the ground, folks are hungry for it.
Yeah.
That's my perspective, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I think we've seen the growth of our community. I'm sure like the different communities you're involved with is, I think I like the void between someone that can sort of talk them through or coach them through things. And I think, people are looking at podcasts or, I don't know if they're like gurus or whatnot, but like people that are a little bit further on the journey, sharing their experiences, and people can adopt and like take some of these suggestions or patterns and incorporate into their own lives. I think that's why you see like the popularity of people like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson, these types of intellectual dark web members, where they're, I think, exploring the universe and their perception and their place in society, and sharing their like, real thoughts about it. And I think people are like, they want to have that communication. Where I think probably in like the late 2000s, early 10s, like there's just like talking heads, kind of like everyone giving you propaganda. I think people are now really realizing that let's actually get real again. Yeah,
it's interesting. So there was an article in the New Yorker by I believe her name is Susan Worthen.
Okay,
and she's an associate professor at UNC. She works on 19th century religion. Okay, and interested in these like notions of community that are created around 19th century evangelical Christian religion. Okay, but she wrote a piece in the New Yorker about the podcast bros, about like Rogan, about I guess like you and I to an extent having these kind of conversations, Peterson. And I thought it was going to be this like scathing critique. Right. And she, you know, she doesn't pull any punches. She's like, there's a reason why this is appealing to people, and there's a reason why it's, you know, it's mostly men, and there's, you know, a little bit of sort of magical thinking that's happening around this. But she concludes with this sense of, but, you know, these folks are offering something that even if I disagree with some of the content that's being said, they're not trying to divide anybody. They're actually trying to create and reimagine a world that can bring people together and connect people in these communities of interest and activities of interest. Yeah. And are, you know, the criticism actually ends on a positive note, that these folks are filling a need and creating a kind of conversation that we would be wise to pay attention to and maybe try to emulate in other kinds of conversations.
Well, I think it's important because I think this community creation, that need can either be filled by tribalism, whether it's along ethnic lines or religious lines, like you kind of devolve back into ethno states. Correct. Or you can create them around what I would say hopefully more modern, postmodern groupings, right? Like around similar interests or similar goals. Right. And I think that might be where modern society sits, where I think there is a danger. I think you see that with groups around racial lines being drawn.
Right. Yeah.
And that would be a very bad place for America to go towards, because I think the demographics are going to change.
Right.
There will be, it will be a non-white majority in 30 years.
Right.
Which is, I don't know. I mean, is there even a historical pattern of how a country shifts when you have such big demographic changes?
I guess,
Like, what's an example of that?
America in the 19th century. One of the things that, so we have our racial history is one that is the struggle of slavery that dominates the narrative of American history. One of the things that gets subsumed in that sometimes is the history of Irish people and people of that were immigrating.
Oh, so you're
in
saying
the 19th
that the
century.
white WASP English dominance majority is now like Italians and these other like now considered white people are not.
Again, I'm talking a little bit way outside my expertise here, but some stuff that I've had to read for qualifying exams and things like that. So just put in pop culture terms, if you watch Gangs of New York, boy, does that resonate. The nativism of the 19th century and in the early 20th century is something that it's endemic to the history of the United States. It just tends to be something we didn't pay attention to because we were focused on other divisions. Focused on the civil rights struggle in the 20th century. So the anxieties about immigration, the anxieties about demographic change, they've been here before, and we've gotten through them, but boy, were they painful. And I think you're right. Like I don't know if I don't want to use the word inflection point. I'm not sure. We may be.
Right.
But it does seem like we are at a reshuffling where the globalisms of the 90s and early aughts have really created,
it's a backlash,
anxieties,
right?
In a number of ways.
I think you're right. I think we see the resurgence of that nativism again,
right? Most certainly. And so the question is, so the big debate is how to respond to that, right? And that's going to be an ongoing debate. Is it economic anxiety or is it demographic anxiety, right? Or is it a combination of the two?
Combination of both, right?
Probably.
I think they're overlapping.
Yeah, and feeding off one another. And so the ways in which we respond to that are going to play out in my little corner of the universe. So that's why I'm very committed to these things, like these sort of community groupings that are happening on the East Bay, because they cut across those tribal lines and other communities of interest. And it's why I tend to be on the side of being more inclusive as opposed to less inclusive, particularly now as I'm slowing down with running. It's like,
it makes sense. I mean, I think the default reptilian brain's like, all right, like I'm gonna just group tribe around like people that look like me.
Right.
I think that's dangerous if we continue down that path.
Right.
So I think we do need to just re-strengthen bonds across ethnic lines into shared culture, shared values.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, most certainly. It's interesting. I grew up in a part of the country where these anxieties were felt, a little bit earlier than I think the national conversation itself was happening. In my hometown, the local textile mill, which created, actually the brand still exists, Cannon Mills. You can get them on towels at Target. So they made, sort of basic textiles, sheets and towels and things like that. That shut down in, I think, 1996 when I moved to Concord, North Carolina, where I grew up. When I was in college, the local cigarette factory, North Carolina, big hub of tobacco. Well, that factory shut down, when I finished up college, the year I finished up college. So there were real implications to the globalization of the economy that came home to roost, and they manifested in ways you might imagine, where it was really easy for resentment to bring hold. When I was growing up, the culture war was over gay people, and being outside in short shorts made yourself a little bit of a target, particularly if you're a young guy running around high schools and things like that.
Runners, you're relatively lean, and
you're lean. You look vulnerable. You're out there by yourself. It's hot. You're not wearing your shirt. Very little of your body is covered. and that codes as gay, or did in the late 90s and early aughts.
Yeah.
I go home now, though, I don't feel it as much. Things have changed, at least in that sector of things. I don't get heckled nearly as much as I used to.
Yeah.
So I do think that, people change. Humanity is defined by change as a historian, right? History is the study of change over time.
Right.
And so things will, that is the one constant. So things will continue to change. It's just a matter of, I think, doing the work to move the needle in the direction that we want. And it takes real engagement. So so I like conversations like this, which I think help. I hope they help. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is reflecting truth. I think people know when people are bullshitting or just overly PC. And I think that's starting to boil over where people are starting to react negatively against that. And I think hopefully my sense is that if people just see more clearly and talk to the facts more clearly, rational people can come together and say, okay, like here are like the set of facts and here's what we should do about them. Right. Maybe the method to solve or resolve these facts could be different given where people come from, but like the facts should be the same. Yeah. And hopefully when people just talk about how people perceive facts and like the discrepancies and how people see things, hopefully disappear, right? Yeah.
The thing about facts, though, is that they're always put in narratives.
Right. As I'm saying, like, can we have a conversation where you just talk about just numbers? Right. Or things that are quantifiable?
This is the computer scientist in you coming out.
Well, yeah, maybe that's overly naive. But then, like, can we just bifurcate that a little bit? Where, like, instead of interpretation and fact and narrative all in one, can we at least agree to a set of numbers and trend lines? Right. And then from there, can we apply different lenses of analysis?
I would hope so. I mean, objectivity is a staple in Western civilization for a long period of time.
Yeah, now it's kind of getting dealt with like alternative facts. But I would like to think that like we, at some level, there has to be some agreement, right, in terms of how we communicate. Like if we don't say that this is one cup, then I can't say anything to you. Correct. Right? Yeah, there's nothing to talk about if we just kind of agree on some, if there's no objective reality, then how do we communicate?
Yeah, it's sort of the George Orwell worry of like, if you can convince someone that 2 + 2 is 5, then
I can't talk to you.
All bets are off.
Yeah, I can't talk to you.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I wonder if maybe one of the issues is finding the baseline that cuts across some of these disagreements. Yeah. Like what's the thing we can agree on? And then working up from there. What are the values that we have? And then working from there and trying to dig down deep to where even if there are things closer to the top that divide us, there's probably something at the core where we can dig down to. And you can't argue with crazy, right? So there's going to be a few folks who might just have to get off. You're not going to convince them. Yeah. But I think there's probably a core set of values, a core set of truths that I would hope we can get down to and work from. Yeah. Maybe it's numbers. Maybe it's quantifiable data. Right. Americans are very
Americans are fat.
Americans are oriented around facts. Yeah. They're oriented around science. They're oriented around numbers and business. Yeah. And so the business of America's business. Someone said that once, right? I don't remember who it was. But so there's probably some places with which we can work from. Yeah. Right. It may not even be a matter of bifurcating. It might be a matter of digging down to find the core, and then working up from there.
I think so. I mean, I think just in my personal relationships and business career, that seems to be like the only real way to resolve conflict. Okay, like what base thing can we actually agree upon, and why are we diverging? Like how at a certain point there's got to be something that we agree upon. Yeah. If there's nothing to agree upon, then like we can't do anything together. Yeah. But can you retract and reverse the thinking to some commonality and then understand, okay, why have you chosen to go left when I chose to go right? And then like compare the methodology of why that decision happened.
You guys are in a business where it feels like there's that level of like supplements and diet. People tend to be pretty tribal about that.
It's super dogmatic.
Isn't it crazy?
It is religious.
Dogmatism is actually a good way of putting it, right? Yeah. How do you approach it then when you come across the sense of someone's ingrained notion about the way the human body works, and you're trying to change someone's mind? What are the tactics you use? Like how do you begin to have that conversation you guys are a little iconoclastic. I would not maybe not iconoclastic, but
I think we're almost classic in the sense we're just reverting to being scientists and engineers.
Okay.
And science is a pursuit of truth, and there's no, like untouchable idol in our realm of understanding human performance.
Right.
And I think we are attracted to and attract people that think in the same way of actually measuring and testing these things in practice. So I think, I know one thing that's really, really dogmatic in the nutrition space is low carb, high fat, keto with like carbohydrate. I mean, I'm sure, especially as a runner, that's something that you think about.
The classic battle.
It's a religious holy war.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you follow like Tim Noakes and the whole ketogenic athlete, the Finney Volek side of things, and then you have all these folks that look at gold standard carbohydrate as like the one true path. And I think and maybe this is where like the clash can resolve, is that there's truth to both. Like I don't think these people are dumb. Like what Noakes is seeing or whatever like the low carb people are seeing, there is some truth there, and what the carb people are seeing, there's some truth there. And I think what people are realizing is that you periodize, you cycle these things, and there's different goals for different people and for different parts of their lives. Like if you are trying to be a maximal athlete and trying to win the Olympics, you're gonna have a very, very different protocol than someone who's 45 and trying to stay and be competitive. Yeah. And I think that just getting to the next layer of just nuance and just like realize, I don't know, like I think people like structure and authority, which why it attracts me to say that, hey, maybe we should just set a simple standard for people to aspire to. Right. Maybe that just like pushes the social community in a direction that you think is reasonable. Because I think humans, for better or for worse, are seeking authority and seeking structure. Right. And I get why, because it sucks to be in an uncertain world, but I think it's embracing uncertainty and having a challenging discussion per case. Yeah, yeah, I do. I would imagine part of the reason why folks are searching for an authority is you want to rely on somebody else's expertise because you don't want to have to be the expert, right? So that seems like that's the case. It's convincing someone to take. Maybe not chances, right? But they sort of experiment a little bit with their own lives, with their own diet, with their own supplement, right? I think about myself, and now I think I'm a little bit more. I'm certainly more receptive to that than I was when I was 20. Right. Where I was like, no, this is what my diet needs to be. If it's not this, but then again, I was also like wearing the same underwear the day before races and the same socks out of superstition, right? Right. You get your routines and your patterns. You think it works for you. Right. Actually, a better example of this and how that can begin to blind you is the running shoes I wore. Back in the 90s, there was the paradigm of you needed stability, you needed arch support within your shoes, and there was a spectrum of arch support that you had to get under your feet. And at one point, I don't know like why the person fitted me like this. Like, oh, you need a strong stability shoe. So they put me in this shoe. It basically had a wedge of hard foam underneath the arch of my foot. Yeah. For 8 years, I ran with this wedge of hard foam on underneath the inside of my feet. Yeah. And what happened? I had like lateral pain on the outside of my leg for 8 years. So like I had to get IT Band-Aid. Just messed you up. Sort of, but why didn't I ever question it? Yeah. Right? Why did I defer to the expertise of the shoe expert? Yeah. And eventually, it took me like working. Thank God for the recession. The only job I could get after college was working in a shoe store, working in a specialty running shoe store. Sort of learned about it. Looked at my own feet. Like, can you look at my feet? Had someone else look at my feet. Like, you know what? I don't think I need this. This arch support here. Since then, that paradigm's began to break down a little bit. Now we sort of realize, like, okay, well, maybe it's not just support. Maybe it's some of the activities we're doing. Maybe the foot functions in a different way. Right. Maybe we shouldn't be so worried about support. Maybe we should be worried about other things, right? And it's a business, and so the marketing will reflect some of that as well. Right. But that is a great example where I wish I had been more willing to not just question authority, but take some chances in terms of
my own performance perspective. And so, and then I got out of those shoes and I haven't had that lateral side pain anymore. That's why I was on the bike at one point was with all of that. Helped a lot. And so I think it's hard that we get set in our ways. We know what we know.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like maybe there's a meta community around, I think what binds people that are interested in what we do is that I think we all are sort of experimentalists or hackers in that way. And maybe you can build a tribe around people that are open-minded to experiment. Obviously, you follow what has the most robust data. Like I don't think we're saying, hey, just try everything. Like not all routes are equally valid in terms of science and data. But we are on the edge of exploring and pushing what is possible. And I think that's kind of how we approach it. And I think it seems, to me at least, it's like the most scientific way to engage performance. Like science is always at the cutting edge. Like if we know it, then that's like history. Like that's just a fact. But in terms of pushing possibility, then we need to explore. Some will be, false paths, some will be valuable paths. And and the science never stops, right? The studies don't stop. The direction of the studies might change a little bit to reflect the interests that are happening within them. And so, I think so. Maybe it is about creating a culture of I guess robustness around like not being like, oh crap, our thing didn't work. Oh, like we go home. It's like, no, it's fine. That's part of science. Like if we just knew every single result before we try stuff, then like maybe I'm God, right? Like I just know I know the future. Like no one is that. I think it's part of just embracing the experimentalist, the empiricist that drives science. One thing that you noted, which I thought was interesting, was that, especially in your writing, that there's a growing interest around elite performance that has popped up in the last few years. Can you dive more into that and get a sense of why do you think there's more and more more of that interest? And I mean, and there's a lot of interest. It's an incredible amount of discourse around performance. And it's, I don't think that's true. Like, or has it always been like, the demigods are always cool. Like the gladiators were like the heroes of their era. So, I mean, it not always true. I think it tends to come in waves. There was another wave of discourse and scientific study on performance, and it happened at the beginning of the 20th century. And I don't know these studies particularly well, but I know them secondhand through folks like Alex Hutchinson has looked at this stuff in his new book. We chatted with him last week. Guy's so smart. He's smart and he's such a great communicator. I really appreciate somebody who can combine scientific know-how. I mean, I think his background like makes sense. He's like a physics guy by training, and I think that again that blending of rigor with performance, I think is very complementary. One of the things he points out is that a lot of these early studies were on factory workers, miners, laborers, how to eke out a little bit more productivity from them, how to keep them from overheating in the mines, how to keep them from breaking down, literally. And so if you want to interpret that like materially, economically, there might be an economic argument that we're living in a moment where productivity is very important again. I don't know many folks who don't spend some time as a freelancer now. It seems like we're in the gig economy where personal productivity is very important to our everyday lives. I wonder if that's bleeding a little bit into the activities that we do beyond it. You don't see your running as isolated from the rest of your life. I certainly don't see. I don't. You don't see your activity, the sports, the things you do. So even our leisure time are sort of interpenetrated through some of the larger, not necessarily anxieties, but motivations that we have. I can agree with that. So I wonder if some of it is, again, as we mentioned, we're living in this sort of reshuffling of a global economy where, my dad worked for two companies, I think his entire life. Three. He was in the Army for a little bit and then worked for one hospital and then worked for another hospital. I think I've worked for like 18 different people since graduating high school, right? So there's a level of fluidity. There's a level in which, as we shift more towards maybe more precarious labor of contract work, as that becomes the way in which folks are making a living, it becomes very important to think about your personal productivity, to stay focused,
to be able to be mindful, to be able to churn out more code, to write more copy, to whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
It wouldn't surprise me if some of that is bleeding into the activities that we are doing for leisure, those values would begin to reflect in our everyday lives.
I think it's an interesting analysis, because I've talked to reporters who've covered the rise of companies like ours around human performance. That they ask me why do you think this is happening? And I make a similar argument that the global economy is getting more and more competitive. People's brain power is getting more and more valuable, and the Pareto distribution of economic value means that it's just any incremental improvement of productivity is worth a lot, right? If you're number one, you're Facebook. You're number two, you're MySpace, and you're gone.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think it's interesting to have you kind of reflect that thinking from what you're seeing, and also expand it out into your leisure activities. I think you're right. I didn't really think about it, but I think.
Do you know anybody who just does recreational bowling for fun?
My friend Will says he bowls, but that's more just because I can chat. It's like golf. Anyways,
it's changing.
Yeah, but it's changing. I agree.
It's changing.
I think I agree.
It's changing.
I think that's just a random.
Strange that one would drag oneself across 26.2 miles for fun.
Right.
So that's the stuff. So that intrigues me. I don't think I have an answer to it, but it's an interesting question to ask. Why these admittedly esoteric activities, trying to become as fast as one can in a foot race and get from point A to point B, why that has had more allure? Right. Why has it grown? Why has it happened now as opposed to some other point in life? Why are obstacle course races, why are those becoming more interesting? Why is functional fitness becoming more interesting? And I don't think these things, they don't exist separate from other spheres of life. And so I'm really interested in how, thinking about what the connections might be. I don't have the answers yet. I'm just beginning to ask the question.
Yeah.
So I really want an opportunity to start to dig deep and think about these things. And so,
do you have any initial insights? I think part of it can be driven by the notion that I think, especially in America, there is more leisure time, perhaps.
That's a good point.
So I think people have to have a channel of competitiveness. I think humans are innately competitive. I think this is where it's interesting. I think that competitiveness has been driven towards, for a lot of history, just war. Our country's gonna kill your country. I think that maybe has gravitated towards sports teams. Our team beat your team.
Yeah.
Get the competitiveness out. But I do agree with you. There seems to be a trend where more and more people want to be the direct. They don't want to be a watcher. Or observer of the competition. They want to be a part of it themselves. Right.
Again, it gets back to why these accessible heroes are so popular, because you can see an example of yourself happening.
Right.
Yeah. The evolutionary psychology example, sort of this is the innate drive. That's one thought. This is where getting back to our roots.
Right.
There's Christopher McDougall, the guy who wrote the Born to Run novel, also makes a similar sort of naturalistic, where humans are born to run. Right. And so that's there's this sort of notion of a nature versus nurture thing. This is a nature thing. I guess it's interesting why we, if it's a war thing, I've never played a pickup game of football where we actually played football the way they play it in the NFL. I don't think anybody does that because it is not fun. You don't want to get beat like that. You get destroyed, right?
Yeah.
So why then, things like triathlon? Why then things like distance running or cycling? I think they fit well in. You could look at it from a tech angle. They fit well in the forms of quantification that we see in other points of life.
Yeah,
things like Strava. These mesh incredibly well with these activities.
Yep.
Very difficult to Strava your bowling score.
Right.
Very easy to Strava your ultra marathon through the Rockies.
Yeah.
And playing it, and there are interconnections with social media there as well. But there's also a lot of folks who are just alert to the data. So we're an increasingly data-driven culture.
Yeah.
One of the websites that I go to look at political analysis is 538, which is quote data-driven political journalism, or just any journalism. All their journalism data-driven.
Right.
And so we're fixated on data. We're looking for data, as you suggested, right? We're looking for the hard truths objective numbers.
Right.
The 1 cup, right? We want to
Right.
just see the 1 cup. And if we can figure that out, we can work from there. And so those sports fit well into that paradigm.
Yeah.
Whereas others maybe not so much. So that's not the entire answer, of course, right?
Right.
But it could be an answer.
Yeah.
And then, so that's one thought. I don't know if that resonates, but it could just be a little bit of bias living here, where this is the most tech. We are in the center of the tech culture, and so it's maybe more
But
apparent.
I would say that, having the chance to pop out of the Bay Area more frequently these days, that people care about sport a lot. So I think maybe it's not necessarily as focused around the technology paraphernalia around, but like this core drive around like being competitive in like a sport, like a football, or being a peak performer, I think resonates beyond just the Bay Area for sure. So I think we're in a very intense microcosm of that, but I would say it is a macro phenomenon.
Right.
Maybe because it is like global culture is homogenizing. And I think that kind of reflects back to your previous point. Like, do you you're spotting the trend where, people's careers have now shifted towards more of contract gig economy, and I think that seems to be like the main line of thinking. But just seeing the pendulums of history, like every time everyone's like assuming that, just project out that, Japan's gonna be the dominant economy that, has pivoted back. I mean, I think there's just been so many cases in history where you can extrapolate out another 50 years and like the whole world would change. I'm just wondering, could we see an echo boom back where people don't like the gig economy, going back to the communities, stuff we were talking about initially, where people aspire to be a part of a tribe or an entity, and the sovereign individual model of just like I'm, myself, and I'm interfacing with contracts with all my other collaborators.
Right.
Is that the future? Like I think in Silicon Valley, you might say, yeah, of course that's the future, and I'm almost coming full circle back to. No, people want a long-term mission that they feel worthy about. Yeah, that feels worthy of their limited time on this planet. Yeah, they want to build long-term working relationships with people with similar missions. Right. I mean, this, can we see more of a reversion there than we are. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. People want that, right? Yeah. It's why you're seeing, as we talked earlier, why people are seeking that out outside of work, because they're not finding it necessarily in their own everyday lives. Yeah. So, for example, here's a good example of, how there are costs to things like a gig economy. Right. One of those costs is the precariousness of that existence. Right. When the gigs dry up, you are in trouble. Yeah. You don't have that security that you might have had with the stability of a factory job. Right. So, for example. One of my guilty pleasures is McDonald's from Uber, and so Uber Eats started doing McDelivery, and it's not a good deal. You'll spend the entire meal on your delivery fee. It'll be twice as what you would have paid in person. But I did it twice to get my egg McMuffin and my coffee. I like McDonald's coffee, so I ordered it, and then lo and behold, magically, 15 minutes from now, a woman showed up around like 11:30 or so. I walk out and I get my Uber Eats. Like, this is a human being. Like, hey, thank you so much. How are you doing today? She's like, I'm on my lunch break, actually, doing a little bit of side hustle. Yeah. And I went, oh, how productive of you. How productive of you. Yeah. Just trying to give a compliment. Yeah. Then I turned around and walked around. I was like, that's actually kind of disgusting that this woman can't even take a lunch break where she can just sit and consume food and not have to work through it. She's jamming.
Yeah, she's jamming. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, she could be very entrepreneurial, or she's paying rent. Yeah. Right. And I imagine it's probably
the latter.
Yeah. And so, I think so. I mean, it won't surprise me if we see the rise of a new form of organized labor, oriented around this sort of contract labor. Right. It would actually, I would I would appreciate that. I would recognize it, and I would think it would be probably laudable so that people have a little bit more buying power from or influence and power against these platforms that are so very profitable and that you and I take advantage of in our everyday lives, but at the expense of real human cost. So, yeah, I think you and I would agree that having a more mission-centered sense of purpose in our work lives, in our productive lives, would definitely be better, right? People like working towards something. They like being part of something that's larger than themselves. The thing is, if people can't find that in their working lives, they're going to find it someplace else, which is where, and that can go in many different directions, and as we've seen, sometimes terrifying directions.
Right.
And so I think it's laudable to think about ways in which we could recreate those institutional senses of mission that we had at one point.
Yeah, that's where I think the discussion around universal basic income or UBI, I think, is discounting. I think they have a overly simplistic story where like people just want money. Yeah. And I think that money is just a small portion of what people need as a resource. Right. Like people, I think one of the most important assets for humans is a sense of importance, or it's like the spiritual notion of a meaningful life. Right. That I think is not captured in like a UBI system. Yeah. Which is like another concept that I think some folks in Silicon Valley or intellectual circles will be like, okay, like once robots take over the jobs, we'll just have people on UBI and people will be fine. It's like, that's not gonna be enough. If people don't, you shove people with money and a lot of time and no direction. That's a really good point. That's a recipe of kind of disaster. Yeah, it discounts the sense of social value that people get or were getting from the economy that they would never get from a check or a direct deposit in their income. Sure, right. Like it's every little bit of money helps, but Aristotle said that humans are social by nature, right? And the UBI doesn't tick that box, right? It is an economic salve to something that might be a little bit more systemic of a problem. Yeah, it's interesting that has people cheering for it on the right, your sort of Silicon Valley libertarians, and then people on the left, some labor unions, like, look, some of these jobs aren't coming back. This is the quick fix, right? But it's often seen as the quick fix. It seems like there's an ease to it, right? That both sides like. It cuts through the bureaucracy that the people on the right hate. It provides the direct aid that the people on the left like, right? And it seems like there's a way in which that you can find the consensus where you could move that forward. It's also something that's easy to study, right? So your technocratic, wonky folks who'd be like, well, we'll see how this works out. We'll give a UBI to folks in Oakland and see how they spend it, and and then we can tweak it, and it's very like centrist in that sense. You can find adherence everywhere, but I would share your suspicion that there's something about that that is still missing. I would say that I think one of the most interesting I guess tweaks of something like a UBI that might fall in line with more marketplace type, more capitalist type thinkers would say that, okay, you just take away all entitlements, like you don't give education, health insurance, you give UBI, and then let the individual decide how to allocate like what was going to just be given to you. Right. Now you can actually spend it, and now you can maybe that could kind of be interesting, where you get like the hyper rational approach to thing where you presume, instead of offering services, just give them the money. You give them and let them make their own decisions. Yeah. And then you make everything a marketplace. The problem with that is that, human beings, the problem with markets is that not all things work well in markets, right? Yeah. Sometimes they can create toxic outcomes. I think healthcare is an example of that, where we've had a market-based system for a long time. And even when we try to market-based, I think that's like actually an interesting topic, right? Like it is a weird market. It's a weird market. It's a market. Well, it's like, so one on the right could say like it's overly regulated market. Exactly. Or like you can't, which is where you insurance out of a state line. Right. Now you have like these weird monopoly systems. Right. Like education. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty nuanced. It's a nuanced discussion. It's a nuanced discussion, and it's outside of my wheelhouse to get into all those debates. But I think
yeah, but I would wonder, like, if you're, you're sure if you commoditized everything, and then give like a basic, like, here's your allocations of things, and you created a market as such, it seems like there would probably be some unexpected costs that we wouldn't have envisioned, in terms of, where would the middlemen arise? Because there would be the middlemen.
Yeah, I would say I think these, like, running a nation state is a very, very complicated system.
Right.
Like, I don't think anyone's smart enough to like take all that state in.
Yeah.
But I would say that, like, just like there's like unintended consequences of our current system, there will probably be like just as, maybe less, maybe more. It is some range of unintended consequences of any other government system. Yeah.
And I appreciate the thought experiments. I tend to be one of the fellows who sort of falls in the line of like, well, what are the moral outcomes that we're trying to gain? Like, what are the moral values that we have? And one of them should be like, all people should get a basic education.
Yeah.
So my general thought would be like, well, we could game that out in any number of ways, of like how, we could like rationalize, like, okay, we'll distribute, a certain level of income. People can pick their own choices. Or you could just provide the education in the ways that we have defunded in a lot of ways. And so this is sort of where I fall in a lot of these questions, is sort of, which makes you fall more on the left of the center, right, in terms of thinking in that way,
right?
In terms of more of the social democracy ways. But these questions are fraught because they're hard.
Yeah.
And man, we got to UBI.
Yeah.
What a fascinating conversation we've had.
Yeah, I mean, maybe drawing this back more towards the performance perspective, you mentioned that maybe this goes back into like the participation culture. But like this like recent notion around positivity in running, this positive mindset thing.
Yeah.
Where it sounds like if you trace back in the history, a lot of it's very stoic.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe just adding some color there, I think there is some recent literature suggesting that this positive, self-talk is actually improving on performance.
Right.
So maybe, but I'm actually curious, like, get your thoughts on why you think there's a structural change and how people, the attitude towards a performance has seemed to evolve.
It does. It does seem like positivity is important and become important and becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
I remember reading. There was even some wild article. There might be some study that shows that if you smile during a hard effort, it tends to make the effort feel easier.
Yeah.
That seems to make sense to me, that positivity, that there are real, there might be performance outcomes that happen with it. I've just noticed, though, that are in a lot of ways, you see this not just in terms of performance, but again, it bleeds. It never stays in the same zone where it's supposed to be. Social media is a very positive place in a lot that it can be very toxic. If you watch Instagram, right? Like, I notice, I scroll through my Instagram feed.
Everyone's highlight clips, right?
Everybody's got that, like, there's that Instagram smile that I think of it, where people are, it's like they just got presented with a birthday cake. It's that, it's a combination of like insane smile. Like I'm really happy.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because, you respond. We like seeing people happy. And so the engagements to happiness are higher on social media. Well, think about it, right? Like, you're more likely to get the likes and the clicks, and it's a sort of self-reinforcing behavior. Negativity doesn't do well in the algorithms of social media.
Right.
So, I think a lot about how this become more common. I have a good friend named, he's a very good trail runner named David Roach.
Okay.
He was here in the Bay Area. His wife was in medical school at Stanford, and he was an environmental lawyer. And now they've started a coaching business, and they're in the Front Range, Colorado Front Range. He's writing a book called The Happy Runner. It's probably going to come out sometime the next year. And it is, and his whole business model is one based on positive thinking and positivity. To the point where I sometimes am like, dude, just frown. Like, at some point, like, he's like, oh, I had this like horrific race. It went terribly bad. I blew up. I threw up. But you know what? It was great.
Yeah.
It was like, no, you need to. It's a marked departure from the way, even in the 90s when I was growing up, where there was a real culture of suffering that was ingrained in distance running that I think came out of maybe it's working class roots in the beginning of the 20th century, where where not entirely working class roots, but you know, a lot of like English clubs based on neighborhoods around working communities where you like do cross country meets in fields through the mud and the slop, and you know, show people a clean pair of heels.
Right.
We fetishized in the 90s things like Alberto Salazar, the guy coach of Galen Rupp, having the duel in the sun with Dick Beardsley, where
Right, like these are grinders.
These grinding guys who just, you know, they kick it out and they spit blood at the end. The head coach of the University of Colorado cross country team, Mark Wetmore, had this sign on his desk at one point that was like "Res severa eram gallidum." I'm missing the Latin, but it's something like "It is a joy to be serious," right? Like, you know, tuck it in, get the work done, and move on. That's changed, and I suspect it's because these activities are way more visual and they're incentivized differently. The only thing I can think of is social media that has changed a lot of this, where particularly now, given, as we were talking about, everybody is a little bit of a personal brand.
Yeah.
I try very hard not to think of myself as a personal brand, but if, you know, there are potential ambassadorships or sponsorships on the line, you need to think that way. If there's product, if there's shoes that you can gain, you're incentivized to think that way.
Right.
If you're in this sort of like messy milieu of like semi-competitive, semi-professional running, you have to think this way.
Right.
Where social media matters, where people are looking for those accessible heroes.
Right.
You need to smile, and you need to be, and so I think that's the causal chain. That's the one that I'm pulling out.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? Does it?
I think that's interesting. I think there's definitely directional truth there. I mean, obviously, I think people do build a brand around just being real, right? So they're showing like them being like, you know, when they're not winning.
Mm-hmm.
But I think directionally, that's because they're opposing the trend of everyone being positive.
Mm-hmm. You know, the counterpoint to that is like, well, no, actually, authenticity is what people are really driving for and want to see, which is maybe a good counterpoint. There are some narratives now.
But I would say like directionally, I think you're right that everyone, you always want to have like that positive spin at the end. Right. Right. Like, it's like, you know, I think it's very common to like, a really brutal race, bonked, the last 4 miles were brutal. But it was a great time. It was great, right? And I think like there has to be like a positive moral to the story.
Mm-hmm. So even when you get the athlete who's struggling with depression, you'll get so there's a beautiful video about the ultramarathoner Rob Krar, who has struggled. I don't want to use the word struggle. I don't like the notion of like a battle with depression. You know, he lives with depression in the way a lot of us do. And there's a great candid interview of him talking about his, you know, mental health alongside physical health as being part of the spectrum of that. I actually now got to think about whether it ends with that upswing. Right. Because, you know, these issues don't end always positively. Right. Sometimes they just are. Right. Yep. And so I guess there's the contrarian in me that's a little bit bothered by, you know, the positivity direction that we're in, because some things just are, right, and it doesn't always work out for the best. But part of the thing that's beautiful is that we can empathize, and we know these things, and like we can struggle together with them. Right. And if we just think they're going to work out fine, we might be less likely to struggle together with them or to empathize with somebody. But you know, it'll be fine. Maybe it won't be fine. Right. It's not always fine, but that's okay, as long as we can figure out ways to be there for each other. Right. So I guess that's why I kind of grind my teeth sometimes, because maybe it's not just about, you know, being positive and happy. Maybe sometimes it's about being sad, but recognizing that to not win, to not beat it, to not be happy, but to be better, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, I like the Stoic philosophy. You know, I think it's interesting, like read something like Marcus Aurelius and get in his mindset of being in, you know, Roman Empire, kind of being sieged by barbarians and what it's like to like control all these things outside of his direct control.
Have you ever thought of like ways to apply that, say, if you're in an uncomfortable, like say when you were running the half marathon? Have you ever?
I mean, I think I've been experimenting with the positive mindset attitude based on data showing that if you smile or see smiling faces, you perform better.
Yeah.
Right. Versus like seeing sad faces or being like frowning.
Right.
So I think I've been applying some of the positivity mindset towards some of the physical aspects, but I think the stoic mindset for business is really applicable in the sense that I think at least for me, I'm not trying to win a competition for running, but I think for a business, it's like kind of like
you've got so much swirling around you,
right? So I think the stoic or like not blinded by optimism or swayed by optimism view is just like seeing reality clearer than others.
Yeah.
And I think that with a world where everyone's spinning positivity or negativity, or everyone's like running their own agenda, if you can just like see the world clearly, you can react more optimally to this changing environment that we're operating in or we're living in.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, not bullshitting yourself kind of a thing with like, oh, we're going to make it always positive. I think it's important because facts, you need to respond to facts properly. You can't, like if a bullet is coming at you, you can't like smile it away. Like the bullet's coming to you.
Yeah. So it's a good point. Yeah. It's a good point. There's not a binary between positivity and negativity, right?
Right.
At least not in human experience.
Yeah.
There tend to be a variety of places and ways you can look at things. And of course, there's the objectivity of the real world and dealing with it. Yeah. I sometimes think that mentioning stoicism, one of the things with, you're in your own head when I've written some stuff about how painful distance running can be. And when you're in sort of, the phrase is the pain cave, right? Yeah. You are really like dwelling on the discomfort in ways that are bizarre. And one of the ways that you always try to like, can I disconnect myself a little bit from this suffering experience? It's something you think about. I've thought about like, is there a way in which, because you are almost sort of like at a certain point, you sort of reassess, you go like, man, how have I found myself in these terrible circumstances and how can I get out of them and how much time do I have left? But sometimes you can be even more circumspect and be like, man, I'm really, this, like you're sort of looking down on yourself, kind of like you're in a part of your brain. It's like, man,
observing.
This is like really, he's really suffering. Yeah. I wonder how hard he can keep grinding. Yeah. And you can almost be intellectually curious about your own performance as it's happening.
Yeah.
But usually you need to get back in because that's not, I find that you can't disconnect yourself and run well. You need to be in it because you need to be, the moment you leave and disassociate, you slow down.
Right.
And you can't hold your hand down on the pedal in the midst of it. Yeah. And that's what makes it so hard is because you have to just
eat the pain.
Eat the pain.
And feel it.
Feel it. And not be, and again, you're right. Like you need to have those, if you're thinking to yourself, I can do it. Yeah. I can do it. Like we can get through this.
Yeah.
The performance outcomes are much better than like, there's no way.
Yeah.
You'll stop. You'll quit. You'll slow down. If you know suddenly, right? Once you give up, it's over.
Yeah. So
there's a baseline in which you need to be you need to believe in yourself.
Right.
Right. And that belief in yourself is the way. And whatever those motivations to believe in yourself can be any number of things. Your reasoning for doing it. Some people it's just a payday. Right. But that can be enough to motivate you. I got kicked down once by a 40-year-old Russian in a race. And I was like, man, this guy he was flying. He was flying. And then I found out that he was a masters runner, right? And there was a different payday for those guys. And for me, it was like, I was
on EPO.
Yeah. I don't know. But I just wondered like, I was like, I finished like 18th. What was the big deal to finish 17th? Well, it was a big deal. There was real incentive.
Right.
So incentivizing things can help. And so, so it's an interesting tension of, anyway, you just said you're speaking of Aurelius, maybe think about that a little bit. And being unbothered by the world, being in it is a tension and difficult.
I mean, I think one common thread that I've seen across athletes and folks that we work with is that you have to, and I think because you just have done this so much, you just get accustomed to that level of pain, right? Like I don't think there's that much mind gaming or like to reprogram your brain. I think it's like, okay, at a certain point,
that is right.
Like program yourself to understand this level of pain threshold and just eat it. Like just enjoy I know it sucks, but like
Right.
you're used to it. You've been there 15,000 times.
Right.
It's not nothing new.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's like, okay. And I think that's like the difference between someone like me and someone like you. Like, you know how to put yourself in that pain threshold and hold it there.
Right.
Or like someone like less experienced there. It's like, you'll be like, I don't know if I can even hold this for that long.
Yeah. And the thing is just, is that there's a process to get there.
Yep.
There's definitely a process to get there. I am this is the thing. I feel like I don't think of myself as like, everybody says this, like, I'm not talented, I just work hard. Like, that's not true. Like, I know there's a certain baseline, which I've been very blessed and lucky to get a certain like abilities to do this. But it is possible. Like, I don't think that like my running abilities are beyond the pale for a lot of people, but it's a long process. It is there aren't many shortcuts. It's just a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time. And you got to play the long game to get to become good at anything, right?
Yeah.
You can't think in terms of the short term. You have to think in the long term. And that's true for anything. You can't think in terms of weeks. You certainly can't think in terms of weeks. You certainly can't think in terms of months. You probably shouldn't even think in terms of years. You should think like, 5, 6 years. You got to put in the time.
Yeah.
To if you really want to get good at something, if you really want to have expertise, or ability, it's just hours. It's just
I mean, just knowing a little bit about running. I mean, getting up to like 80, 90, 100 miles a week is not easy.
It's not easy, and it's not something one should try to do in a year. Yeah, it's one of these things. We're
maybe a year if you're aggressive like Michael Brandt, but like I mean, it's
but that's
like,
aggressive.
Yeah, it's aggressive,
and you're risking injury.
Yeah. That's like one thing that I've realized a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I think more and more it's about injury prevention than like, obviously you push yourself, but like if you can just not stay injury free, you will just outcompete your competition. Because anytime you get an injury, you're out for so long. It's
weeks and weeks, and it disrupts things, and it's just less time on your feet. Yeah. Then you have to build back up again. Yeah. And I think that's if you look at the people who have long-term success in distance running, they're talented. They're good at the activity in and of itself, but one constant is they rarely get hurt. My good friend Magda Boulet, she went to the Olympics in the marathon in 2008. She gets hurt, like she's had injuries, but not very many. Yeah. And when she was competing on the roads, she didn't get hurt very much at all. And since I've known her, I think she's had one injury maybe, and I think it might have been like a trauma-based injury. Yeah. Like she's gotten lucky in a trail race.
It makes sense. I mean, basically she can put in much more high quality hours than anyone else. And it's like, okay, if you believe in the notion that input in is, somewhat linear correlated with output, then she's just put in better quality hours than anyone else.
And some of this is practice. Yeah. The lady goes to bed at 9 o'clock. It's hard. She's disciplined. Yeah. And so it's not just genes, some of it is as you said, like the discipline and the mindfulness of being aware of that.
Yeah, let's move to some audience questions and have a little bit of a popcorn here.
Sure.
So Matt Duffy asks, what's the worst running advice you've gotten and taken seriously?
Ooh, the worst running advice. I think I got to a little bit. Focus on the short term. It wasn't any single bit of advice, but I think we're highly incentivized to look for the short deadline, for the upcoming race, the upcoming season. And if I wish I could go back, take Sam Robinson from when he was 16. Yeah. And you're so motivated. Everybody wants to work hard. Right. There are very few people who don't want to work hard. The real struggle is to play the long game. Yep. I wish I could go back, take him aside, shake him, be like, it's not this season. Don't think about this season. Don't think about the next season. Don't think about high school. Worry about college. Don't even think about college. Wait, you're going to develop. And so you need to maybe don't throw the huge heavy miles in this summer. Wait, have some patience, build slow, develop. You're 16. And I think that's true, not just for, adolescent young athletes. I think it's true for a lot of folks in a new activity. Play the long game. If you're really interested in it, if you love it, stay with it, but take it slow.
Yeah. And I think that reflects some of the conferences and summits that I've been involved with, where one of the mantras is that like everyone always takes the easy days too hard and the hard days not hard enough. And you're just always like you're working hard, but you're not pacing yourself right. Right. You're always pseudo going hard. So you can't go really, really hard when you need to. And you not resting and recovering when you actually need to.
Which is a long process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Youssef via our podcast at hvmn.com writes in and asks, what do you think draws different personalities to different types of exercises? I guess you spoke a little bit about just like your baseline body size, but like weightlifting versus running.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of more obvious, but the personality question is interesting.
Yeah, the personality question is kind of interesting. And I think there are a lot, so like in my own little world of distance running, there are a lot of commonalities, a lot of type A personalities, people very goal driven. It's very easy to quantify distance running. So people who are very interested in personal improvement can find a place where you can begin to see micro gains are easy to see.
Right.
You can see like, oh, it's faster on intervals.
What about weightlifting? Like I lift up 2 more pounds on my bench.
Yeah. I don't know why that doesn't appeal to me.
Right?
Yeah, it doesn't. But I can see, for me, I wonder, what the differences are. I mean, gosh, I would think some of it, Youssef, might be if you're good at something, you tend to get rewarded at it.
Yeah.
And at a certain level, we're all kind of rats pressing the buzzer for the cheese.
Right.
So if people who are good at weightlifting tend to like it, I'm not just. I guess I think about like what would be some other activities I'd like to try out.
Right.
They actually don't tend to be the more endurance ones. Like I'm interested. Like, I'd love to get more into climbing. I'd love to get into some martial arts.
Which arguably is endurance based.
Yeah, climbing is endurance based, but very different kind of. Like you're not moving much.
Right.
And people who are climbers and sport climbers probably say like, oh, there is some quantification that can happen in this. There is training involved, and part of it might just be my outsider knowledge of it.
Right.
But it seems like there's a level of body awareness that's different in those activities. Yes. Certainly in martial arts, there's a level of body awareness that must be different. And I think that's fascinating and is an appeal there that I'd love to learn more about. So I can see how, you could get in a couple of different ways.
I mean, I think just for me to riff on that question, I think endurance athletes can take pain more in the sense that like it's very painful to like lift like super heavy, but you're done in like 30 seconds.
Yeah. And for sprinters,
so maybe maximal pain for 30 seconds, like a sprinter, versus like running a marathon, you're doing 2 hours. That's like you can't hide in like a 2-hour run. Yeah.
And if you're a sprinter, you need to be very interested in the types of real technical drill work to become that, to get that short explosive burst. And it's all about perfect form. And so there might be a level of like, the interest falling there. What draws someone from one set of activity to the other? Man, there's got to be a number of different factors involved, but maybe it's an intuitive sense of
just like you're born and
or just
people
luck
around you thought it was cool to like be a basketball player.
I'm sure there's a lot of soccer players who are soccer players because that's what
Ronaldo was their hero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Brian Gillis asks, you've competed at a high level at both trail running and road. Yeah. What do you prefer? Why? Contrast? Compare?
In terms of racing, it depends a little bit. I tend after like I've been going through like 2-year cycles between racing, doing trail racing, and then moving back onto the roads. And right now I'm on kind of a road cycle. Yeah. There's some specificities between the two events, and so if you're going to do trail and ultramarathon stuff, you need to work on running uphill and downhill, and sort of the technical footing, getting your body able to do that. That's not a challenge in road running. It's a much more not homogeneous, but it's the same motion that you're doing over and over again. It's much more about eking out those efficiencies over whatever the distances that you're running. And so I tend to bounce between those, and I think mixing it up a little bit is probably good for long-term cross-training. But the trails are great, especially we're blessed here to be surrounded by so much open space.
Yeah, it's fun to just
It is fun to go out on the trails and get away from it. But then also it's so hilly too. I wish there were a few flatter trails in the east. Like there's some stuff on the bay, but you have to run alongside the freeway, and it's like, oh man, it used to be like one flat trail in the woods, but that doesn't exist. So that's kind of the trade-off. Sometimes you want to take a little easy. Sometimes you don't want to run through the evening commute. And you want to go out in the woods, and you can do that. So it depends on where my head is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, again, as a much less experienced runner, but like a road is nice, just like the route, you know exactly how to benchmark yourself.
Right.
But it's like fun to run in like a beautiful like hiking trail. Like instead of hike it, just run it. And it's like, whoa, it's like fun. It's like kind of a massage on your feet because like the road, you're just like slam, 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 slam.
Right.
But like rolling the ankle a little bit in different ways kind of feels nice. It's like kind of a
and if you need that more meditative experience in say like after a hard day of work, you'll get more of that if you're running in the woods. You know, it's just quieter, so your mind gets quieter. Yeah. So I appreciate both, but you know, the trails are nice for that.
And I think we'll end with a fun question. Okay. What is a beer mile, and why is it a thing?
What is the beer mile? Why is it a thing? Yeah. So the beer mile, I've done some writing on the beer mile. Okay. So a beer mile is a God, who thought of this? It must have just been collegiate runners. Yeah. It is where you drink 4 beers over the 4 laps of a mile. Oh, so you drink a 12-ounce beer. So there are different rules, but the Kingston rules, which are the North American standard, is you have to drink a 4% beverage, which you use Budweiser as your standard.
It's like a kind of a light.
Yeah, you can use a bottle or a can. It's a lighter beer. It's not too heavy, but it can't be below that. So it can't be a really like a session ale or anything like that. You have to drink the beer, run a lap, drink a beer, run a lap, do it 2 more times. So 4 laps, and you have to drink a beer before each lap. Yeah. If you throw up, you have to run an extra lap, which basically disqualifies you in a competitive race. And it has become incredibly competitive. There are now world championship races that bring out guys who can run this thing.
What's the world record?
Well, the world record, I think, is still like 420 something.
Damn.
Somebody just set it again in Canada, a guy named Corey Belmore. And oh man, I'll send you the link. You can put it in the show notes. Yeah. It is a work of sheer grace to watch this guy run so fast, consume these beers in 6 or 7 seconds.
So you have to be stable to keep,
good question. Great question. There is a chug zone, an exchange zone where you can pick up the beer and walk while you're drinking it. So you can continue to move, but it's like 15 or 20 meters at the most.
Right. So it's not easy to pound liquid when you're running.
I think the beer mile is the most uncomfortable experience. Yeah, I'm so bad at it. I'm so bad at it. It's so awful.
It's a lot of liquid.
It's one of the, every time I do it, I get into the middle of the second lap and I think, I regret doing this again. It's so uncomfortable.
You're adding about 3 pounds of water.
Yeah. It's so much fluid. Yeah. You turn into a volcano at the end.
Does everyone just boot at the end?
Some don't. To finish, Corey Belmore ended up. So now to keep things to standard, they will do measurements of your beer. So you might drink your beer and finish and go, and how do you know if you didn't pour it out or something, right? So they'll measure what's left in the bottle, and they'll have judges make sure you're not spitting it up or emptying it. He had too much beer. I think you can't have more than 4 millimeters left in all of the beer bottles. Okay. So he was disqualified. But goodness, it has gotten fast. I mean, these guys are running sub 60-second laps plus the beer.
Oh man, it's wild.
It's wild. Yeah. It's wild. It's a little bit of a kind of a fraternity-ish kind of looking thing. Seems to come out of like American binge drinking culture, but well, not necessarily American binge drinking culture, but
global binge drinking culture.
I was in London for last summer's World Championship and saw these guys, and you could say that they are drinkers with a running problem. That might be a charitable. There was a lot of drinking, even not involving the beer miles. There were just a lot of beer. Yeah, more beer than I can handle. That's for sure.
We got it. Maybe we'll do that at some point.
I think everyone should try one once. Yeah. It might be all you need. As I said, they're hard. It's not the alcohol. It is the quantity. It's the fluid. That's the challenge. That is the challenge.
I mean, you're not going to be drunk. I mean, it's too quick to actually get drunk. Quick. You're just like got to pound like bubbly liquid and holding it down, and you're basically sprinting and like pounding as fast as you can.
Taking down the third lap's always hard, and then drinking that fourth beer is really difficult. And if you can get into that fourth lap, usually, because it's the final lap, you can hold it down, and just get to the finish line. But there's like a minute there, 60 or 2 minutes or so, where you're drinking and thinking like, I got to do one more after this. And you've turned into that baking soda and vinegar experiment. It's all shuffled up under.
That's also because like you're running around.
You're running around and stuff in it.
CO2.
Are the beers cold?
They can be like if you usually these things are so informal that you
I
bring
make it as
BYOB.
warm as possible, so there's less CO2 in there.
That's probably true. I have a friend, a physicist. You guys doctorate in physics at Berkeley.
Yeah.
He thought he was thinking this. He's gaming this out. And you're like, well, look, carbonation may not be the best option here. I'm going to use a nitrogen-based beer that is effervescent through. So he did Guinness, thinking it would be easier.
Yeah,
it was not. It was Guinness.
It was even more foamy.
It was more foamy and a heavy, malt-based beer. So less sugar, but more whatever is in Guinness, and it didn't work well. It was a train wreck.
Because also like the Guinness bottles have like the thing that makes it more foamy too, right? So I can imagine it's just like super foamy.
Oh yeah,
put down.
Yeah, it would be awful. But yeah, that's the beer mile.
Yeah, no, awesome. I mean, let's wrap up here. I mean, where do people find your work? I mean, obviously an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But what's next for you this rest of the year?
Yeah.
Where do people find you?
So I have my portfolio writing is on robinsonsamuel.com. I'm on Strava. You can find my running on Strava. I'm pretty, it's a fun network. Yeah. And I put out a newsletter every week. It drops usually on Tuesday nights. It's called The Breakfast Club. It's oriented around a morning run that I do every Thursday in Oakland. People are welcome to join. We run it's a little fast. We run about 7:30 pace for about 8 miles, but gets together a lot of different folks, girls and gals, or guys and gals.
Nice hour out.
Nice hour out before work, 6:30, 7:30 or so. I'm on Twitter as well, at Sam, son of Robin. Folks want to hit me up on Twitter, but Strava, Twitter, and then my website and my newsletter, places where pretty active and engaged on the socials, as the kids say.
All right. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate it, man.
As always, please send my producer Zill and I feedback at podcast@hvmn.com. iTunes reviews are always appreciated. And remember, you'll score a free Sprint Mini in the process. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And talk to you soon.